something came up just that I noticed earlier today, yesterday morning actually, which is a topic that really piqued my interest, and I wanted for us to explore it together so that we could share some thoughts and ideas. And it is around the recent bill that has come through Congress, which is called the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Bill, or going to be Act, once Biden puts his signature to it. Now, this is designed, it seems, or it's said to be designed to stem a spike in, what do they call it, hate crimes against Asian Americans. There is so much I want to jump into on this, but the danger is too much. So I would like to put this to you, open up the conversation between the three of us, and just let it happen. I'm bewildered that we're having to have legislation in the world for what I call a responsibility of individuals, and a responsibility of individuals to just be decent to each other. And in our times of multiculturalism, which has been decades now, if not centuries, but certainly decades, we've come to understand that there are different cultures and different thinking, and we've learned tolerances and acceptance and good behaviours and bad, obviously. But I just am flabbergasted that we're looking at legislation for this type of thing. So that's my thing. I'm mind blown by it. Please talk to me, help me.
Help you. Well, they say what a 260% rise in Asian hate crimes that have happened in the past, year and a half, which obviously all stems out of the whole issue of COVID-19 coming out of China, and now it's all of a sudden we're getting all excited about the difficult things that are going on for Asian Americans, which is fascinating to me, to watch this. Really a pretty emotional bill that's going through Congress and has now been approved. I don't know. I am with you on that same page. Is that it's interesting that somehow we have to continue to try and legislate dignity for people. Why? Why is it the civility of just common sense? I think it's because of the deterioration of a culture. It's a deterioration of a society more and more. And so we deal with such deep tribalism that has now become incredibly apparent in the United States. And trying to somehow see if there's a way we can bring the country back together. I don't know. I think this is just a continued outgrowth. There's incredible irony in this bill. I don't know. I mean, Michael, you've read all the inputs of the bill, but what's fascinating about this bill, the very thing that is now, yeah, Liz says I'm going to be the one to do it. I'm going to do it anyway. So, the very thing that's being cried about across the country through the Black Lives Matter of defunding the police, giving them less authority, so on and so on. They're passed this bill for Asian hate crimes, and what have they done? They've increased the authority of the system across the spectrum. And I'm going, oh, this is rich. This is just really funny. The very thing that you were supposedly all saying we're going to have to, minimize, now you're trying to maximize for another group of people. Okay, well, that it's not getting to the root issue. The root issue is just plain dignity for people and treating them with civility. I mean,
what do you say?
Yeah.
What do you say, Dr. Mike? Because I agree. It's simple root issue.
I think one of the challenges that we face is that we are taking all of culture and seeing it as one gigantic monolithic whole, that everyone, one of the things that Mike just said was common sense. What does common sense mean? That it's sensible to common people. The reality is culture is actually made up of microcosms, families, parts of families, neighborhoods, streets, villages, communities, states, sections of the country, nations, continents, and ultimately the human family. The problem is the entire human community is really what happens within individuals and small groups, micro groups. So when we have and anti-Asian American and Pacific Islander hate, and we try to create a law or an act that will reduce hate, what we're saying is the culture as a whole will say to every single individual within that culture that we are expecting you to behave in a certain way. Most of life can be thought of as a bell curve. There's early adopters, there's late adopters, and then most of the people are in the middle. So when you referred to Liz, for decades now, or even maybe centuries, we've been dealing with multiculturalism, and we've come to accept that people are from different backgrounds and different languages and different styles. Everyone accepts that. That is actually not true. And the reality is, pick a different topic. There will be certain issues that are very, very dear to you where you don't see that issue the way other people see it. Let's just take something benign. You like shopping at certain stores, and somebody else says, "Oh, I never shop there. I hate that store. I was treated so rudely once by a staff person, and I've held it against them forever." And you say, "Well, that's not my experience. And I have that same kind of loathing for another store altogether." And now you have provincialism. You have your way, they have their way, and it's very hard to see across that divide. So pick a different topic, and any individual can be just as restricted, just as provincial as we are being magnanimous and open-hearted about ethnic backgrounds. The challenge we face, not only in the United States or Western English-speaking culture, but around the world in all various cultures, is that those commonalities are not held commonly by all people. And when an act or an event occurs at which people have to change their behavior to deal with a different people group on what store I like to shop at, or what idioms I use in my expressions, or what kind of people I associate with, once you get into a very energized situation that changes reality for everyone, like this pandemic has done, there are kinds of people who want to assign blame away from themselves, and they find a target. So in the bell curve, that might be the last 5 or 10%, not the 90% or the 95%, but it's the last 5%. Well, out of 350 million Americans, 5% is going to be 70,000 people. That's a huge amount of tremendous hatred that can be directed in ways that are really unhealthy. So the culture as a whole says, we're going to bring that up to the table. And what can Congress do? They are restricted to passing legislation. They cannot change emotions. They can't change relationships. They can't change language or idioms or backgrounds or dress codes. They can only pass legislation. So they do what they can to create forward momentum that could possibly generate conversation, and people say, one at a time, I am not going to act with hatred towards that kind of person. but the entire culture movement is going to happen one person, one family, one neighborhood at a time. This only is a way of helping that, and it doesn't surprise me at all.
Over the years, though, haven't people's behavior been changed by rather more marketing or media, softer tools rather than legislative, and particularly when it involves authorities and enforcement?
I was coming of age in the 1950s and early 1960s in Central America, in the middle United States, Cincinnati to be specific. We lived in a region that was not very far in miles, but very far in culture from the distressed inner city, maybe 5 or 6 miles. When I got on a city bus to go to downtown schools from my particular neighborhood, I rode with workers, I rode with people of color, I rode with people who were not from my socioeconomic level. But the way the city school system worked, we all got on the same city bus. I put my token in. And what I loved to do was ride in the back of the bus. This is 1957. Ride in the back of the bus because it flopped up and down over every block in the pavement. And I love the feeling of flying up in the air. I was sitting with all African-American people. And one day the bus driver said to me, "Little boy, you sit here in the front of the bus right behind me. I do not want you sitting in the back of the bus anymore." And I thought as a kid, oh, it's just because I'm young. It was because I was white.
Right.
Now, the issue is in the late 1950s, early 1960s, there were matters that had to be dealt with by law. And the law changed first. There were people who would not change, but since 1957 left us 65 years ago, many of those people just simply died without changing. They're gone. The new laws created a platform that as the next generation grew up, this sounds odd, that was new normal. It was the normal law that my generation grew up with, that my parents' generation did not grow up with. So as I moved among urban people, I felt extremely comfortable going from the neighborhoods that I lived in down into the city to shop, to work, to play. That was no problem for me. But it was a platform that was changed because of law. And so it's not either or, as just pick one side and you'll be able to change culture. It's really multiple sides and everyone contributes to the change. In our country, the legislative branch of government is only able to change laws. They can't do anything else. They can jump up and scream. They can join marches. They can wear different clothing. Doesn't matter. They pass laws. So what they're trying to do is influence the experience of culture by creating a new platform. It may be that old thinkers simply have to die off before the next generation is going to come on a new platform. That's kind of the way it works.
Yeah, it does seem to be the way it works. We need generational change. I did think, though, you drew a parallel between the 50s and today's question, but I mean, I would have thought that the topic of the day in the 50s was so deep-seated that something as powerful as legislation would be the only way to create a faster shift. But this thing that we're talking about is new. It's not, there are still obviously 95% of 350 million people, we're presuming, who are not having this kind of hate feeling towards other people. So I don't know, it just doesn't seem like it needs the same level of impact. Maybe this, actually, it just occurred to me, maybe this legislation is not designed to be a long-term program. Maybe it is just a fillip to get things to shift now, in the hope that it doesn't become an entrenched behavior. I don't know, but I like the idea of idealism. Here we go. I like the idea of me making a mistake and, and being racist, not intending to or intending to, and it was not, no, I wouldn't intend to because that's not me, but I might be, and I might so I would make a mistake, and then I get to look at my mistake and analyze it and hope to even correct it with the person I might have slighted, but certainly try not to repeat it. That's what I think is our responsibility.
And for a person that has very high reflective skills to be able to say, I see myself acting, and now I'm going to reflect on that takes a certain amount of personal strength, education, equipping, coaching to make that kind of self-reflective experience valuable. But there are many people that do not have those kinds of self-reflective skills. So the challenge is, I feel something passionately, step out of yourself and say, let's observe your own behavior, your own values, your own passions dispassionately. And that's a very refined skill. So you can have it in conversation. One of the most difficult things to do is not to go up to somebody who is from a vastly different culture and life experience than yourself, but your next door neighbor, your sister-in-law, your very close friend, and say, do I have permission to talk to you about what I just observed in you? And that person may say, absolutely not. Keep your mouth shut. You respect that. But if the person says yes, say, let me reflect what I just saw you say or do. Can we talk about that? One of the things that I do frequently is ask permission to address very difficult subjects. And if the person says no, I respect that. But if they say yes, now we can actually talk. And cultural change, even massive cultural change, happens one person to the next, a friend to a friend, a family to in a neighborhood.
Yeah.
But it's getting those words out of your mouth. That's really hard to do, to say to a nearby neighbor, what's going to happen if I bring this topic up? That's why I ask permission, as opposed to starting with a you statement. You did this. I have learned that is ineffective.
Well, I'm still stunned with the fact that you rode the bus when you were 2 years old to go to school because you were a child prodigy. But
No, I was
I'll get
4.
over that
I
sometime.
said 4. I was 4.
I'll get over that. I'll get over that part at some point. Probably not. I think one of the things that sits on this that just drives me absolutely crazy is that, sure, we're legislating against hate crimes, and yet what I think is as equally powerful in changing culture is individuals and their own life of what they're living out in character and dignity to other people. I understand that legislation, particularly for civil rights, that was a huge deal. And you started there and you went there. Where I think we have such a different kind of environment within the United States right now is this attitude that it's okay to just trash anyone at any time. If I don't like what they're doing, it doesn't matter. I can just eviscerate them, and I can eviscerate them on social media. I can eviscerate them on podcasts. And it's okay. And somehow we don't seem to get this correlation that you're talking about hate crimes, and yet you walk right over here, and what are you doing? You're doing exactly the same thing, maybe not to the same group of people, but you're doing the same thing to another group of people. So how in the world do you get validity with the fact that you're going to try and quote unquote get some moral high road here by passing this great legislation that we don't have hate crimes and we want to bring people to justice about this, and then you turn around and you're doing the same thing to another group of people because they don't fit the model you want. Now, understand, I get it. Civil rights, I know you're the older one by 20 days, but the reality is
25. Don't demean how far ahead I am.
Okay, 22 and a half. So
This is not a negotiation.
it's always a negotiation with you. So,
For those of you who
but
don't know, I was born 25 days before Mike. We're basically the same age, except for 25 days, I'm 1 year older. And
Yeah,
I
you
use
should-
that to my advantage.
For those of you who don't know, these two men have been working together so long, they do behave like a married couple.
We are brothers from different mothers. So
You
it's
are.
we're
exactly.
identical
Go down.
twins.
It's like, yeah, we are.
Keep
Just
going.
Yeah.
Keep going.
so during the civil rights movement, yeah, we had people who were unbelievably racist that said incredibly awful things. I'm not negating that,
And they still do. But go ahead.
and they still do. But I think from a standpoint of sociologically looking at what was going on, though, was much more singular in focus in their lifestyle. And now, because we have this broad sense of where everybody can say anything they want, whenever, and they can be totally, you don't have to own it at all. I
Right.
mean, you can hide behind any platform. And then somehow we think that taking the moral high road and doing legislation is going to change us, but we're not willing to change our own behavior. I mean, even the way we're treating each other in the Senate, in the House,
Yeah.
and across the whole 9 yards. I'm going, you don't get this. Is that you if you're going to try and make real change, you're going to have to give some sacrifice yourself and lead in a way that has some moral high ground to it. That means you're going to have to change how you deal with people. Back to my issue of dignity. I think that somehow, if we are going to really survive as a culture in the United States, there has to be some return to dignity of the individual that allows people to be people, that they're not something that can be used.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a personal responsibility. I wish I could find another word other than responsibility, but I think we each have a personal responsibility to contribute to this. And we won't and don't get it right all the time. We get it wrong, and that's okay too, isn't it? And the secret that I have adopted several years ago now, but is when I get it wrong, I might feel bad about that for a while, but I very, very quickly go, okay, you did get it wrong. That's okay. And I let myself off the feeling of feeling bad about it or guilt. I don't have that much, certainly not for long. And I allow myself to work through the process of what it was I really did and try and nut it out and get better at it. But I think that thing about being kind to yourself is integral to the success of personal responsibility, because you want to be, I'm going to use a word that I don't really like, but to be good in a community, to be a good contributor is a responsible action, and it's not easy, and you don't get it right. I'm dreadful. I get it wrong too often and wish I didn't, but anyway, that's been my key tool when I fall in a heap, which happens, is to remind myself that it's okay. You made a mistake. I forgive myself, basically. Put it in simple terms.
Well, certainly one of the main issues that I think pertains to all of this, which is a discussion that we'll unpack as time goes by, is the issue of power and how power flows within a person first, and then interpersonally with people you know, and then with people you don't know, how it goes beyond you. And the challenge, I think, as Mike was talking about within Congress, is the use of power. It's an addiction that is far stronger than to an opiate.
Yep.
And that is, I crave power, the accumulation of power. I can never have enough for most people. And so most relationships, most engagements, most work, most life is about accumulating and then dispersing power in our relationships. I think at the root of this, the people who, for a variety of reasons, feel disempowered or even powerless have this quest to accumulate power and use it in some ways inappropriately. And that's what really starts to come out. A person who is destructive against a people group, or racist, or against persons different than themselves, men against women, people of finance against people who are poor, people who are on the East Coast versus people on the West Coast, people in across the pond in Europe compared to Americans. Doesn't matter what it is. When there's some division of power, the accumulation of that power and the use of that power becomes really indicative of who the person is and who they want to become. And that's a huge topic for us to unpack, which we're not going to do right now, but that's really what this ongoing conversation is about, is what really matters in life, not in theory or in value, but in practice. And I think that comes down to the accumulation of power.
Yeah.
And perhaps a final word from me anyway on that, and I'll ask you to provide a final word too, is finding that thing that matters to you. Right. Is where to start. It's the place to start, I think. And so in a way, it's a kind of a return to self, or a return to understanding who you are. For me, I think we've become so involved in, well, survival to start with, which has been a real issue, enhanced more recently by the last year. Material acquisition, all of the things that we've been encouraged to, go for, marketed to. So anyway, I think really coming back to what matters to the individual, to, in my case, to me, is what has actually really given me proper direction. Anyway, that's my final word for the day. And I think we'd better wrap it up. I might have to start using my power of, clicking the button in a minute.
Well, I think that one of the challenges and the issues that resides in all of this, which correlates to really what Mike is talking about, is power, and the reverse side of that is the whole understanding of humility, of regaining dignity in people's lives, and the ability to be able to admit you're wrong and ask for forgiveness. And that seems like in our culture that's seen as almost the worst thing you can possibly do. And it's like you're weak if you do that kind of thing. It's like you're some person that has no spine whatsoever. And the reality is it takes a much stronger person, someone who has a much better self-understanding, someone who really knows who they are and what their meaning is in life, to be able to do that, which then allows for there to be real dignity in that relationship. But until we come to some kind of understanding that the whole aspect of power, and I'm on the top of the heap, and I'm going to basically put my foot on your neck, and even if I make huge mistakes, I'm never going to admit to that. I'm never going to cop to that, own those things. It does nothing but just continue developing a brokenness in a society that says what? Well, it's as long as you're on the top, then it's okay. It's like, well, but wait a minute, that's not how this works in a society. If you're going to have community, you have to, and I'm using that word, I know that phrase, have to, there needs to be, and there should be, and hope must, and ought to be, all the words that Mike loves, a dynamic that brings us together at a level that has some commonality in dignity. And that's not going to come without a sense of where the power structure breaks down, in the sense of being able to be a structure that has humility built into it. And that's going to change it. because you won't be able to do that anymore. And that makes people very nervous to even begin to think that, because I think a lot of people don't even know what that is. So there's my 2 cents.
So my
Now that
closing
we're all
word
confused.
is a technique that you can actually try that will get closer to the root of what we're talking about here. This seems very simple. And as I describe it, you say, oh, that's so easy to do. I could easily do it. Don't say so. Do it. Sit in your chair for 1 minute and do absolutely nothing. Control your breathing, control your movements, control the agenda, be completely content for yourself for 1 full minute. You will find out that that is extremely hard to do. To get control of your own thoughts, your own breathing, your own fidgeting, your own movements for just 1 minute. If you can stretch it to 5, you're virtually a master. And the key in all of this is learning to be content where you are right now. Doesn't mean you don't have an agenda. It doesn't mean you're not driven. It doesn't mean there's not things to do, but you can choose to be contented and stop for 1 minute. And that will get us closer to where we need to be in this conversation.